The silence inside the SUV was more piercing than any scream. My son, Mark's, words were still ringing in my ears. If you're not going to do what I want, then you can stay on the street. Get out of here. When the door slammed shut and the car sped off, leaving me alone in the darkness of a desolate road at 62 years old, with no money and no cell phone, I knew something inside me had died forever. What I couldn't imagine was that there, in that night of despair outside of Denver, a woman in a wheelchair would emerge. She took my hand and whispered, "Pretend to be my daughter, dear. Your son and daughter-in-law are going to regret this bitterly." But before we continue, make sure you are already subscribed to the channel, and write in the comments what part of the United States or the world you are watching this video from. We love to know how far our stories reach. My name is Margaret, and until that night, I prided myself on having raised a brilliant son. Mark was a successful lawyer, married to Chloe, a beautiful and ambitious woman. I had given them everything I had, my house, my savings, my trust, all in the name of love. When I had a mild stroke 6 months ago, they took me into their home, but every day was a new humiliation. I would hear Chloe complaining about the extra work, the cost of my medications, the space I took up in their luxury condo in Denver. That afternoon, we had gone out for what Mark called a special trip. We drove for hours. I was confused, but happy to be out of the house after weeks of confinement. When it started to rain, we got into an argument about the will, which Mark insisted I change, leaving everything to him and nothing to my niece, Paige, who had always cared for me. "Don't you understand, Mother? I'm the one taking care of you now," he yelled. When I refused, the car stopped abruptly on the side of a back road, the kind that winds through the mountains outside Denver. "Get out," Chloe ordered from the passenger seat, without even turning to look at me. "But it's raining, son. Where are we? Either you sign the papers or you get out here." "We're sick of your ingratitude," Mark replied, with a coldness I had never seen in his eyes. When I tried to argue, he simply got out of the car, opened the back door, and yanked me by the arm. I fell into the mud, my legs too weak to hold me. The rain mixed with my tears as I watched my own son and his wife abandon me, accelerating into the darkness without looking back. I stayed there, sitting in the muck, icy drops running down my wrinkled face. The dark sky seemed to collapse on top of me. There were no houses nearby, just a poorly lit road and the sound of the rain. The bag that was in the car contained my ID, medications, and the little money I still had. Everything was gone. I tried to get up, but my body was trembling from cold and fear. My knees gave out, and I fell back to the ground. That's when I heard the sound of wheels on the wet pavement. I thought it was Mark, coming back full of regret, but when I turned, I saw a different silhouette emerging from the fog. It was an elderly woman in an electric wheelchair, protected by a transparent raincoat. Behind her, a tall man held an enormous umbrella. She stopped in front of me, her piercing eyes fixed on my devastated face. "It was your son, wasn't it?" she asked, her voice firm, contrasting with her fragile body. I couldn't answer. I just nodded, as the tears kept falling. "Come with me," she said. "Pretend you're my daughter. Your son and your daughter-in-law are going to bitterly regret what they did today." "Who are you? How do you know?" I stammered, confused and scared. She smiled, a smile that combined wisdom and determination. "My name is Eleanor Vance, and I recognize abandonment when I see it. Come, before you catch pneumonia." The man accompanying her approached, extending his hand to help me. I hesitated for a moment, but what did I have to lose? I was alone, with no money, no ID, no medicine, abandoned in the rain. I accepted the outstretched hand, and he helped me to my feet. "This is Arthur, my assistant," Eleanor explained. "My car is right over there. You're going to be okay now." As Arthur guided me toward a black sedan parked a few yards away, I looked at Eleanor and saw something in her eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just kindness. It was a steely determination, as if she knew exactly what she was doing and why. I had no idea that night would mark the beginning of such a profound transformation in my life, nor that this mysterious woman in her wheelchair held secrets that would forever change my understanding of family, revenge, and, above all, myself. The interior of the car was luxurious and warm. a shocking contrast to the mud and rain covering me. Arthur placed a blanket over my trembling legs, while Eleanor watched me with unnerving intensity. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice still shaking. "To my home," Eleanor replied. "Don't worry, you'll be safe there." I looked out the window, watching the desolate road disappear as we continued down a path I didn't recognize. It was strange how, in a matter of minutes, my life had taken such a radical turn. I suddenly realized I was in a car with strangers, with no one in the world knowing where I was. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "Because I know what it feels like," she said simply. "I know what it's like to be discarded by the person who should protect you." Arthur kept his eyes on the road, impassive, as the car cut through the storm. After about 30 minutes, we turned onto a private drive that wound up a hill. When the headlights illuminated what was ahead, my breath caught. It was a stunning mountain estate with huge windows and a majestic entrance. The kind of place you see in glossy magazines, not in real life. Arthur parked under an elegant carport and got out to open the door for Eleanor, activating the mechanism that lowered the platform for her wheelchair. "Let's go inside," she told me. "There are dry clothes waiting for you and a room prepared." The inside of the mansion was even more impressive. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, antique furniture that looked like it had stories to tell. A housekeeper met us at the door, showing no surprise at seeing me soaked and confused. "Helen, this is Margaret," Eleanor announced. "She'll be staying with us for a while. Please prepare a hot bath and take her to the blue room." Helen nodded and guided me up a magnificent staircase. I followed her in silence, still too stunned to ask questions. The room was spacious and elegant, with an enormous bed and windows that overlooked a garden I could barely make out in the darkness. The hot bath was a balm for my aching body. I found silk pajamas on the bed and soft robes in the closet. Everything there seemed to have been prepared for my arrival, as if I were expected. This feeling gave me chills. When I went downstairs again, I found Eleanor in the living room by the roaring fireplace. Her wheelchair was positioned strategically in front of the flames, and she watched the fire with a thoughtful expression. "Sit down, Margaret," she said, indicating an armchair beside her. "Helen will bring tea and something to eat." I obeyed, still feeling like I was in a strange dream. "How do you know my name?" I asked, realizing I had never introduced myself. Eleanor smiled. "I know many things about you, your son Mark, your daughter-in-law Chloe, the house you left them, the stroke you had 6 months ago. I even know about your niece Paige, whom Mark wants to exclude from the will." I froze. "How is that possible?" "I have my methods," she replied vaguely. "The important thing is that I know you don't deserve what they did. And believe me, they are going to pay for this." "I don't want revenge," I murmured, although a part of me didn't believe my own words. "I just want to understand why my own son." "Money and power change people, Margaret," Eleanor interrupted. "But not always for the better. Mark and Chloe think they can do whatever they want without consequences. We are going to show them they are wrong." Helen entered with a tray of tea and cookies. As she served, I watched Eleanor more closely. Despite the wheelchair, there was something undeniably powerful about her. Her gray hair was impeccably styled, her clothes were elegant, and her hands, though wrinkled, bore discreet but visibly expensive jewelry. "Who are you, really?" I asked when Helen left. Eleanor took a sip of tea before answering. "I am someone who learned that justice doesn't always arrive through conventional means. And tomorrow, you are going to find out exactly what that means." That night, lying in the luxurious bed of that mysterious mansion, I couldn't sleep. The image of Mark abandoning me in the rain, mixed with Eleanor's enigmatic face and her unsettling words. Something told me my life would never be the same again. And I was right. The next morning, I woke up disoriented. For a moment, I thought I was home, that the entire nightmare of the previous night had just been a bad dream. But the elegant, unfamiliar room around me confirmed the harsh reality. My son had abandoned me on a desolate road, and now I was in the mansion of a stranger who seemed to know far too much about my life. I found new clothes folded on a chair, all in my size, which only added to the mystery. I put on a simple but elegant outfit and went downstairs, following the scent of fresh coffee. Eleanor was in the dining room, her wheelchair positioned at the head of a long, polished table. Arthur stood behind her, like a silent, watchful shadow. When she saw me, she smiled. "Good morning, Margaret. I hope you slept well." "I confess I didn't, much," I answered honestly, sitting in the spot she indicated. "I have so many questions." "And you will have answers," she assured me, as Helen served coffee and a full breakfast. "But first, we need to resolve more urgent matters. Your identification, for example. They were in my purse, in Mark's car." "I've already arranged for duplicates," she declared casually, as if talking about the weather. "How? That's impossible in such a short time." She smiled again, that mysterious smile that was beginning to unnerve me. "I have connections. And money. Two things that make life much easier, Margaret." I watched her more closely as we ate. There was something familiar about her, although I was sure I had never seen her before. "Mark must have noticed my absence by now," I commented. "Don't worry about that. He's not going to look for you. How can you be so sure?" Eleanor gestured to Arthur, who immediately picked up a tablet and handed it to me. On the screen was a text message sent from my number to Mark. "Son, I caught a ride with a friend. I'm going to stay with her for a while. I need to think about everything. Don't look for me." "But I don't have a cell phone." "Mine was." "In your purse?" "I know," Eleanor finished. "That text was sent from a new number, registered in your name, but one that Mark doesn't know. He's going to think you changed your phone." I was speechless at the level of planning. "Why all this effort? Why do you care what happened to me?" Eleanor set her silverware aside and faced me with an intensity that made me shudder. "Because Mark and Chloe are not the first people to abandon someone vulnerable out of greed. And I swore that as long as I lived, I would use my resources to ensure that people like them faced the consequences of their actions." After breakfast, Eleanor invited me for a walk in the mansion's gardens. Arthur pushed her wheelchair while I walked beside her, still processing everything that was happening. The garden was a spectacle in itself, with fragrant rose bushes, ornate fountains, and marble statues. We stopped under an elegant gazebo where Eleanor dismissed Arthur with a gesture. "Margaret," she began when we were alone, "there is something I need to show you." She took a small remote control from her pocket and pressed a button. To my surprise, a panel slid open on the gazebo floor, revealing an embedded digital screen. With another button, the screen lit up, showing an image I recognized instantly. The house where I lived with Mark and Chloe. "What is this?" I asked, alarmed. "I have cameras installed at several strategic points around your house," she explained calmly. "Look." The image changed, showing Mark and Chloe in their living room. There was no sound, but it was clear they were arguing. Mark looked nervous, running his hands through his hair repeatedly, while Chloe gesticulated angrily. "They are arguing about you," Eleanor said. "Chloe is worried you might have gone to the police. Mark is assuring her you wouldn't, that you were always too weak to confront them." I felt a deep pain watching my son talk about me that way, even without hearing his words. How could he know me so little? "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, feeling tears welling up. "So you understand who you are dealing with. They are not sorry, Margaret. They are just worried about the consequences for themselves." The image changed again, showing Mark in his study, on the phone. He looked agitated. "Now he's talking to his lawyer," Eleanor explained. "He's asking what happens to your inheritance if you disappear long enough to be declared dead." I felt my heart clench. Is my son planning my death? Not exactly, but he is exploring options to benefit from your absence. I closed my eyes, unable to keep watching. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much about my situation?" Eleanor turned off the screen, and the panel closed back into the gazebo floor. For a long moment, she remained silent, looking out at the gardens with a distant expression. "20 years ago," she began finally, "I was a very different woman. Healthy, active, with a promising career as a judge. I had one son, Edward, and an ambitious daughter-in-law, Gabrielle." Her voice trembled slightly, the first sign of vulnerability I had seen in her. "When I had an accident that left me paraplegic, they took me into their home. At first, everything seemed fine. But little by little, the comments started, the complaints, the humiliations. Exactly like what happened to you. I felt a chill as I realized the similarities between our stories." One night, after an argument about money, they took me for a drive. Edward stopped the car in an isolated area and abandoned me there, in my wheelchair, with no phone, no money, nothing. My God, I murmured, horrified. I was stranded in that place for hours, until a couple found me and called the police. When I was rescued, I made a decision. I would never be a victim again, and I would use everything I had, my legal knowledge, my connections, my money to get revenge, and to help other people in the same situation. And what happened to your son? I asked, afraid of the answer. A dark smile formed on her lips. Edward and Gabrielle lost everything. Absolutely everything. It took me years, but I managed to prove they had embezzled money from the company where they worked. He was arrested. She left him. When Edward got out of prison, he was a broken man. No money, no wife, no future. The way she spoke, without showing any remorse, frightened me. And you didn't feel sorry? He was your son. He stopped being my son the moment he left me to die on that road, she replied coldly. Since then, I have helped other women like us, Margaret. Women betrayed by those who were supposed to protect them. And what do you plan to do to Mark and Chloe? I asked, my heart racing. The same, she answered simply. I'm going to ruin them completely, unless you ask me to stop. I looked at her, confused. Why would you give me that choice? Because revenge must be a conscious choice, Margaret. I don't want you to blame me later, when you realize the extent of what I am going to do. You need to decide. Do you want your son and daughter-in-law to pay for what they did? Or would you prefer to just move on? I looked at the immaculate gardens around us, trying to process everything I had discovered. A part of me wanted to scream, "No, stop," to protect Mark in spite of everything. But another part, a part I barely recognized in myself, wanted to see him face the consequences of his actions. I need time to think, I finally replied. Time is something we have plenty of, Eleanor said, maneuvering her wheelchair to return to the mansion. But remember, while you are thinking, they are planning how to get rid of you permanently. I followed her back to the house, feeling as if I were walking a tightrope between the past and a future I could barely imagine. In the days that followed, I lived in a strange limbo. Eleanor's mansion was like a separate world, protected and isolated from reality. I was introduced to the staff, besides Helen and Arthur. There were gardeners, security guards, and a team of people who worked in offices in the basement, whose exact functions were never clear. Every morning, Eleanor would show me new images from Mark's house. I watched my son and Chloe carry on with their lives normally, showing no remorse, arguing about how they would divide my assets if I never reappeared. The pain I felt watching those scenes was indescribable, but Eleanor insisted I needed to see. The truth hurts, but illusion kills, she would say. One particularly cold morning, Eleanor took me to a part of the mansion I hadn't seen yet. It was a kind of gallery with portraits on the walls and objects in display cases. It looked like a private museum. These are the other women I've helped, she explained, as Arthur pushed her chair slowly down the hall. Each one has her story, her pain, her redemption. I looked at the portraits of women of different ages. They all had a look that mixed dignity and determination. Under each photo was a small plaque with a name and 2 dates. What do the dates mean? I asked. The first is when they were abandoned. The second is when they got justice. At the end of the hallway, there was an empty space on the wall. This place is reserved for you, Eleanor said with an enigmatic smile. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. A middle-aged woman, elegant and with an air of authority, introduced herself as Caroline Hayes, Eleanor's personal attorney. She brought a folder full of documents. Mrs. Holden, she began formally, I am here to discuss your legal options. Legal options? I repeated, confused. Yes, Eleanor asked me to prepare different strategies, depending on what you decide to do regarding your son and daughter-in-law. Caroline opened the folder and began to explain, in clear but technical terms, how we could proceed. One option was to simply guarantee my safety and financial independence, annulling any power Mark had over my assets. Another, more aggressive option involved reporting him for abandonment of a vulnerable adult, which could result in serious legal consequences. And then there was the third option, which Caroline presented with a professional neutrality that contrasted with the gravity of what she suggested. We could ruin Mark and Chloe completely, using Eleanor's resources and connections to expose frauds they didn't even know they were committing. Frauds? What frauds? I asked, alarmed. None yet, Caroline replied calmly. But we could create compelling evidence. That would be illegal, I murmured, horrified. Technically, yes, Caroline admitted, but Eleanor has ways of ensuring nothing comes back to you. The choice is yours, Mrs. Holden. What do you wish to do? When Caroline left, I sat alone in the library for hours, contemplating what to do. That evening, Eleanor found me still there, lost in thought. Have you decided? She asked, maneuvering her chair to be beside me. How can I choose between protecting my son and protecting myself? I replied, anguished. He made that choice when he left you on that road, Eleanor reminded me, her voice firm but not cruel. Mark chose money over you. He's my son, I insisted, tears streaming down my face. Despite everything, Eleanor took my hands in hers. And it's precisely because he is your son that the betrayal was so painful. Margaret, you are not choosing between him and you. You are choosing between remaining a victim or taking back the reins of your life. And what if I choose to do nothing? What if I just want to leave, start over somewhere else? Then I will respect your decision, she said. I will provide you with a place to live, comfortable and safe. But Mark and Chloe will go on believing they can get away with what they did, and they will do the same to others. That night was the hardest since I had arrived at the mansion. I dreamed of Mark as a child, his smiling face when I took him to school, his first lost tooth, his graduation, his wedding. How had we reached this point? Where had I gone wrong? The next morning, I made my decision. I found Eleanor in the garden, admiring the roses that were beginning to bloom with the approaching spring. I want them to know what they did, I said, my voice firmer than it had ever been. I want them to feel the weight of their actions, but I don't want to completely destroy them. Eleanor studied me for a moment, as if evaluating my resolve. Are you sure? Mercy can be interpreted as weakness. It's not mercy, I corrected. It's a choice. My choice. I want Mark and Chloe to lose what they value most: money, status. But I want to give them the chance to rebuild their lives as better people. The chance they didn't give me. A slow smile formed on Eleanor's face. You are stronger than you imagine, Margaret, and wiser than I was when I was in your place. That same afternoon, Caroline returned with new documents. The plan was simple, but ingenious. We would reveal that Mark had committed professional negligence in a few cases, enough to tarnish his reputation and make him lose important clients, but not enough to have him jailed or disbarred. As for Chloe, we would discover and expose some accounting manipulations she was making at the company where she worked. Again, enough for a demotion and loss of prestige, but not for termination. And the house? Caroline asked. Technically, it's still yours. I want it back, I replied without hesitation. Not to live in, but to sell it and donate the money to organizations that help abandoned seniors. Eleanor nodded in approval. An excellent choice. And where do you plan to live? That was a question I didn't have an answer for. I don't know. Maybe I'll rent a small apartment, something I can afford on my pension. I have a better proposal, Eleanor said. Stay here. Become a part of what I've built. Help me find and assist other women like us. I looked around at the imposing mansion, the meticulously cared-for gardens, the empire Eleanor had built from her own pain. It was tempting, but terrifying. Why me? You barely know me. I know enough, she replied. I saw how you reacted when you faced betrayal. I saw the compassion in your eyes even when you spoke of punishing your son. You have the balance that I lack, Margaret. I tend to go too far. Maybe you can teach me to find a middle ground. The proposal took me by surprise. I need to think about it. Naturally, she nodded. But while you think, there is something I want to show you. Something that might help with your decision. Eleanor took me to a room I hadn't seen yet, on the second floor of the mansion. It was a large space, with several tables and computers, where a few people were working intently. On the walls were screens showing images from different places, residences, offices, streets. This is our operations center, she explained. From here, we monitor the cases we take on. On one of the screens, I recognized Mark's house. On another, I saw his law office. A third showed the company where Chloe worked. We started implementing the plan this morning, Eleanor said. The first step was to send an anonymous email to Chloe's boss, suggesting he check certain discrepancies in the accounts she manages. I watched, fascinated and horrified at the same time, as Eleanor showed me how the plan would be executed over the next few days. It was like attending a play where I knew the ending, but not the details of how we would get there. And now, she said, guiding me to a separate table, we are going to prepare your reappearance. My reappearance? Yes. When everything is in motion, you will return. Not as the frail, dependent mother they abandoned, but as an independent and self-assured woman. This is crucial for the final phase of the plan. Which is? The confrontation, Eleanor replied, her eyes glittering. The moment when you will look them in the eye and they will know they lost. Eleanor's mansion became my home in the following months. I learned to move through it as if I had always lived there, discovering its secrets and understanding its greater purpose. Every room, every object seemed to have a story to tell. Stories of women like me, who had been abandoned and then rescued. Caroline, the lawyer, became a constant presence. She guided me on legal matters and helped me understand each stage of the plan that was being meticulously executed. The operations center was like an anthill, with people working day and night, monitoring Mark and Chloe, gathering information, planting small seeds of chaos in their lives. The secret, Eleanor explained one afternoon, is to never make it look like there's a plan. Every blow must seem like a coincidence, bad luck, or a natural consequence of their own actions. And so it was. First, small setbacks began to affect Mark at work. An important email that never arrived. A client who inexplicably canceled. A file that vanished from the system. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to make him nervous, irritable. As for Chloe, the discrepancies in her accounts were discreetly pointed out to her supervisor. They weren't real fraud. Eleanor made sure no one was falsely accused of a crime, but minor inconsistencies that suggested incompetence, not dishonesty. Why not just reveal that they abandoned me? I asked once. Wouldn't that be enough to ruin their reputations? It would be your word against theirs, Caroline explained. Unfortunately, our society still tends to discredit older people, especially women. Mark would probably claim you are confused, exaggerating, or even inventing things out of resentment. It's more effective to attack what they truly value. Professional success, money, status. I watched through the cameras as my son and daughter-in-law's lives began to slowly unravel. The arguments between them became more frequent and bitter. Mark blamed Chloe for spending too much. She accused him of being incompetent. They no longer had time for sophisticated dinners or parties with friends. Financial worry began to corrode their relationship. One night, I saw Mark drinking alone in the living room, looking at an old photograph, a picture of us when he was a child. For a moment, I felt my heart ache. That was still my son, no matter how much he had hurt me. I wondered if I was going too far. Doubts are normal, Eleanor said, noticing my hesitation. But remember, we are not destroying Mark. We are giving him the chance to rediscover his values. Meanwhile, my own transformation continued. Caroline had recovered my documents and bank accounts. I now had access to the resources Mark tried to take from me. Furthermore, Eleanor insisted I see medical specialists to properly treat the after effects of my stroke. You have been neglected for too long, she said. With the right treatment, physical therapy, and correct medication, my mobility and energy improved significantly. I also began working with a therapist, Dr. Evans, to process everything that had happened. The abandonment, the rage, the guilt I still felt for punishing my son. The real healing comes when you understand you are not getting revenge, Dr. Evans said during one of our sessions. You are restoring balance. 3 months passed this way, with Mark and Chloe facing increasing professional and financial difficulties, while I grew stronger, physically and emotionally. Then, the day Eleanor had planned from the beginning arrived. The day of the confrontation. Are you ready? She asked when I entered the dining room that morning. I took a deep breath. I think so. You don't need to be sure, she said gently. Fear is natural. But remember, you are no longer the woman they abandoned on that road. The plan was simple. Mark and Chloe had put the house up for sale, my house, which I had given them to cover their growing debts. Caroline had arranged for me to appear as a potential buyer, accompanied by Eleanor. Arthur drove us in a different car, more discreet than Eleanor's usual limousine. The entire way, I tried to calm my racing heart. I was going to see my son again after months, but under circumstances he could never imagine. We arrived promptly at the scheduled time. The house, which I knew so well, seemed different now. Colder, less cared for. Arthur helped Eleanor with the wheelchair while I waited, wearing sunglasses and an elegant hat that partially hid my face. The real estate agent met us at the door. "Mrs. Vance," she greeted Eleanor. "And this must be your friend, Mrs." "Margaret," I replied simply. "Just Margaret." We went inside. The house was staged for the visit, but I noticed small signs of decline. A worn-out sofa, walls that needed new paint, valuables that had disappeared, probably sold. "Are the owners here?" Eleanor asked the agent. "Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Holden are home. They asked to be present during the viewings." My heart sped up even more when I heard footsteps approaching. And then there he was, Mark, my son, thinner and with dark circles under his eyes, but still with that confident walk he had inherited from his father. Beside him, Chloe, tense and clearly stressed. "Good morning," Mark said, extending his hand to Eleanor first. "Mark Holden, and this is my wife, Chloe." "Eleanor Vance," she replied, accepting the handshake. "And this is my friend, who is interested in the house." Mark turned to me, his professional smile already in place, ready to convince me to buy. But when I took off my sunglasses, the smile froze. His eyes widened in recognition and shock. "Mother?" he whispered, his face turning pale. Chloe, who was beside him, let out a small gasp. "It's not possible." "Hello, Mark," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Chloe, I see you're selling my house." The silence that followed was thick, charged with tension. The agent, realizing something was wrong, muttered an excuse and discreetly moved to another room. "What? How? Where have you been?" Mark stammered, still in shock. "Does it matter?" I asked, maintaining my calm. "After you abandoned me on that road, in the rain, I thought you made it very clear that you didn't care about my whereabouts. I didn't." "It wasn't exactly like that," he tried to argue, throwing a desperate look at Chloe, who remained paralyzed. "It was exactly like that," I corrected. "You left me to die, Mark. Your own son." "We were stressed," Chloe chimed in, finding her voice. "Do you know how hard it's been taking care of you since the stroke? You didn't intend to. Leave me alone, with no money, no ID, without my medications?" I completed. "How strange, because that's exactly what you did." Mark took a step in my direction, his face a mixture of fear and calculation. Always the lawyer, trying to assess the situation, find a way out. "Mom, we looked for you," he lied shamelessly. "We were desperate. We went back to that place. But you were already gone. We thought maybe you had gotten a ride, and then we received your message saying you were with a friend." "What message?" I asked, feigning confusion. "My phone was in the car." "With you." Mark turned even paler. Eleanor, who had observed the scene in silence, decided to intervene. "Mr. Holden," she said, with the authority of someone who spent years as a judge, "spare us the lies. We know exactly what happened that night. We have witnesses, we have evidence, and we also know what you did afterward. Or rather, what you didn't do. You didn't look for Margaret. You didn't go to the police. Instead, you began planning how you would divide her assets if she never reappeared." Mark staggered as if he had been struck. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" "I am someone who recognizes abandonment when I see it," Eleanor replied, repeating the same words she had said to me that fateful night. "And what do I want? Justice." It was then that Caroline entered the living room, carrying a folder. We hadn't seen her come in, but she was clearly waiting for the opportune moment. "Mark and Chloe Holden," she said formally. "I am Caroline Hayes, Mrs. Margaret Holden's attorney. I am here to inform you that, as title holders of this property, you are being evicted. Furthermore, We have enough evidence on hand for a criminal case for abandonment of a vulnerable adult, as well as attempted misappropriation of assets. Chloe began to cry. Not tears of remorse, but of panic. Mark, on the other hand, tried to compose himself, the lawyer in him taking control. "This is ridiculous," he protested. "You can't prove anything. It's her word against ours." Caroline smiled coldly. "It's not just her word. We have witnesses who saw you abandon her on that road. We have records that you did not report her disappearance. We have emails and messages exchanged between you discussing how you would benefit if she never reappeared. Do you want me to continue?" Mark collapsed into a chair, defeated. Chloe continued to cry, now muttering accusations against him. "You said no one would know. You promised it would be simple." I watched the scene with a mixture of emotions: sadness for the family I had lost, relief for finally confronting the truth, a strange sense of power for being in control of the situation. But mostly, I felt pity for the desperate man in front of me, who was once the boy I loved more than anything in the world. "I don't want you to go to jail," I said, surprising everyone, including myself. "I don't want to completely destroy your lives." Mark lifted his face, confused. "Then what do you want?" "I want my house back. I want my assets back. I want you to admit what you did, not just to me, but to yourselves. And I want you to understand what you almost lost forever: the chance to be better people." Eleanor looked at me with a mixture of surprise and admiration. This was not exactly the plan we had discussed. I was supposed to be implacable, let them face the full consequences. But in that moment, looking at my shattered son, I decided that true justice wasn't in total destruction, but in the opportunity for redemption. "Caroline," I called, "what would be the terms of an agreement?" The lawyer, professional as always, quickly presented the conditions. Mark and Chloe would have 1 week to leave the house. They would return all my assets and documents. They would sign a confession detailing the abandonment, which would be held in escrow. If they ever tried anything against me again, the document would be used. And in exchange, Caroline concluded, Mrs. Holden will not file criminal charges against you. There was more, of course: financial consequences, restrictions. But the essence was that they would have the chance to rebuild their lives, albeit from scratch and with the constant memory of what they had done. Mark and Chloe, cornered and out of options, agreed to everything. While Caroline handled the details, Eleanor led me out of the house, to the garden where I had so often sat to read, watch birds, and dream of a future I thought would always include my son by my side. "You forgave them," Eleanor said, not as a criticism, but with curiosity. "Why?" I looked up at the clear afternoon sky, because the difference between them and us lies precisely in that, in the ability to show mercy when we have the power to destroy. Eleanor was silent for a moment, contemplating my words. "Perhaps you're right," she said finally. "When Edward abandoned me, I gave him no chance. Maybe I should have done things differently." For the first time since I'd met her, I saw genuine vulnerability in Eleanor's eyes. "It's never too late," I said softly. "If you want to find him—" "He died 2 years ago," she interrupted, her voice low. "Alone, in a public hospital. I only found out after the funeral." I put my hand on hers. "I'm sorry." "Me too," she replied, and I realized she was referring not only to her son's death, but to everything that had happened between them, to all the lost opportunities. When Caroline finished with Mark and Chloe, we returned to the mansion in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I had confronted my son and obtained justice, but not in the way I had initially imagined. Instead of the bitter satisfaction of revenge, I felt something deeper and more lasting: peace. "And now?" Eleanor asked when we arrived. "Now," I replied, "we begin the next phase." The house I recovered from Mark and Chloe was no longer a home for me. It was filled with memories, some good, others too painful. I decided to sell it, as originally planned, and use the money to create a foundation dedicated to helping elderly victims of family abandonment. The Aurora Foundation, I suggested to Eleanor, in honor of the dawn I saw when I left the darkness of abandonment behind. She loved the idea. It will be a more public arm of what we do here, she said. A perfect compliment. In the months that followed, I immersed myself in the work of the foundation with the invaluable help of Caroline and Eleanor's team. I discovered skills I never knew I possessed. For organization, for public speaking, for connecting with other people who had gone through similar experiences. The Aurora Foundation grew quickly, attracting donations and volunteers. We created programs for psychological support, legal assistance, and social reintegration. Every new face that came to us reminded me of where I myself had been just a year before, lost, desperate, believing there could be no new beginning. As for Mark and Chloe, we kept our distance, but we didn't lose sight of them. Through Eleanor's discreet surveillance networks, I learned they had moved to a smaller city where Mark worked in a modest law office and Chloe taught accounting classes. They lived simply, struggling to rebuild their lives. I felt no joy in their difficulties, only the hope that they were learning something valuable. One afternoon, about a year after the confrontation, I received a letter. The envelope was simple, the address handwritten in Mark's script, which I would recognize anywhere. I hesitated before opening it, fearing what it might contain. Eleanor, who was with me in the living room, noticed my apprehension. "Do you want me to leave?" she offered. "No," I replied. "I'd rather not be alone for this." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers and began to read. "Mother, I don't know if you will read this letter, and I wouldn't blame you if you decide to throw it away unopened. I don't deserve your forgiveness or your attention, but I need to say some things, even if it's just to the paper. What I did to you was unforgivable. There is no justification, although I spent months trying to invent one to make myself feel better. The truth is, I was consumed by greed, by selfishness, and I betrayed the purest and most unconditional love I have ever received in my life, yours. Since that day at the house, Chloe and I have lived with the weight of what we did. Our marriage ended 3 months ago, not because of the money or status we lost, but because we finally saw each other for who we really are. I am trying to be a better person. I work as a pro bono lawyer 3 days a week, helping people who can't afford legal representation. It's not much, and it certainly doesn't erase what I did, but it's a start. I saw online about the Aurora Foundation. It seems like a wonderful thing, exactly what you always wanted to do. I am proud of you, even though I have no right to feel it. I am not asking to be back in your life. I know that bridge was burned by my own hands. I just wanted you to know that your words that day about giving me a chance to be a better person meant something. I am trying to honor that chance. With love, though I don't deserve to use that word, Mark." When I finished reading, tears were streaming freely down my face. Eleanor reached out and took my hand, a silent gesture of support. "Are you going to answer?" she asked finally. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe he's really changed. Another part fears it's just another manipulation." "We can verify," Eleanor offered. "Find out if what he says about the volunteer work is true." I thought for a moment. "Yes, let's verify. But even if it's true, I'm not ready to have him back in my life. Not yet." Eleanor nodded, understanding. Time heals, but it leaves scars. Some relationships never go back to what they were. And maybe they shouldn't. Her words resonated with me. Over that year, our own relationship had deepened in ways I didn't expect. Eleanor, with all her toughness and determination, had become not only my mentor, but my closest friend. We shared not just a mission, but a mutual understanding that came from having walked through the same valley of shadows. As the Aurora Foundation grew, so did my role in Eleanor's larger organization. I became a sort of counterpoint to her. Where she saw vengeance, I sought redemption. Where she applied force, I tried compassion. Together, we formed a balance that benefited all the women we helped. And there were many. Every month, new stories came to us: wives abandoned after decades of marriage, elderly mothers left in hospitals, grandmothers evicted from their own homes by greedy grandchildren. Each story was unique. Each woman had her own pain, but the pattern was painfully familiar. "How can there be so much cruelty in the world?" I asked Eleanor one night after hearing a particularly shocking case. "It's not cruelty necessarily," she replied thoughtfully. "It's indifference. People become so obsessed with their own desires and needs that they simply stop seeing others as complete human beings, especially the elderly. It's as if we become invisible after a certain age. But we are changing that, I affirmed, with a conviction that grew every day. One woman at a time. One autumn afternoon, 2 years after my rescue, Eleanor called me to her private office, a place where she rarely received anyone. It was an austere room with a large oak desk, walls covered in books, and, surprisingly, no technology in sight. "Margaret," she began, with an unusual seriousness even for her, "I need to discuss something important with you." I sat in the chair across from hers, worried by her tone. "What's wrong?" "My health is failing," she said directly, without preamble. "The doctors give me a year at most." The news hit me like a punch. Eleanor, despite her wheelchair, had always seemed indestructible to me, a force of nature, unshakable and eternal. "No," I protested. "There must be treatments, specialists." "I've already consulted the best," she interrupted gently. "It's degenerative and irreversible. I've been dealing with this for longer than you imagine." Tears welled in my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you already had enough to deal with. And because I was in denial myself." She smiled, a frail but genuine smile. "But that's not why I called you here. I called you because I need you to take over." "Take over?" All of this, she made a broad gesture, indicating not just the office, but the entire mansion, the organization she had built. "I want you to be my successor, Margaret." I was speechless. The responsibility was immense, not just the mansion and its resources, but the network of people who depended on us, the women we hadn't yet found and rescued. "I don't know if I can," I admitted finally. "You built all of this from nothing. I'm just." "You are exactly who must continue," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "You bring what my approach always lacked: balance, compassion, the ability to see beyond the pain to the possibility of healing. This organization needs that to survive long term." She opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "Here is everything: legal documents, bank accounts, contacts, information on every current case. Caroline is already aware and will help with the transition." I took the folder with trembling hands. "What if I fail?" "You won't," she replied with unshakable confidence. "Remember that night, in the rain, when I found you? I told you that your son and daughter-in-law would regret it bitterly. And they did, didn't they? But not in the way I originally planned. It was your influence that brought the possibility of redemption into the equation." She reached over and took my hands in hers. "That night changed 2 lives, Margaret. Yours, obviously, but mine too. You taught me that justice doesn't have to mean total destruction, that there is strength in mercy. It is that lesson I want you to carry on after I am gone." In the following months, we worked side by side to prepare for the transition. Eleanor taught me everything about the internal workings of the organization, the contacts, the methods, the resources. As her health deteriorated, I took on more and more responsibilities, always with her advice and guidance. It was painful to watch her weaken, this woman who had saved me with such strength and determination. But even on her hardest days, her mind remained sharp as a blade, and her will indomitable. 6 months after our conversation in the office, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. I was prepared, of course. All the arrangements had been made, all the documents signed. But nothing could prepare me for the pain of the loss, for the void her absence left in the mansion, in the organization, in my life. The funeral was discreet, as she wanted. Just the closest people myself: Caroline, Arthur, Helen, and a few other longtime employees. There was no family. Eleanor had outlived them all. After the service, I found an envelope on my bed with my name, handwritten by Eleanor. Inside was a letter and a small golden key. "Margaret, if you are reading this, I am no longer here. Do not be sad. I lived exactly as long as I needed to live, and I did exactly what I needed to do, including finding you. The key I'm sending opens a small box in the back of the second drawer of my desk. Inside, you will find something I always wanted to give you, but never found the right moment. Remember, what I built was not just an organization for revenge, but a sanctuary for women the world tried to erase. Continue that work, but do it your way. The compassion you bring is what was missing from my approach. And finally, a piece of advice. Never forget that night in the rain, the woman you were and the woman you became. There is power in that transformation, a power that will continue long after we are all gone. With love, Eleanor. With tears in my eyes, I went to her office and opened the indicated drawer. There, I found a small, carved wooden box. The key fit perfectly, and when I turned it, the lid opened with a soft click. Inside was an old black and white photograph of two young women smiling at the camera. I turned it over and read the inscription on the back. Beatriz and Elise, 1965. Next to the photo was a silver brooch in the shape of an aurora sunbeams rising over the horizon. I immediately recognized the face of the other woman in the photo. It was my mother, Elise, who had passed away more than 10 years ago. Eleanor had known her. They had been friends. Suddenly, it all made sense. Eleanor hadn't found me by chance that night. She had been looking for me, perhaps watching me for some time, waiting for the right moment or the most desperate moment to intervene. I placed the brooch over my heart, feeling a connection that transcended time, uniting 3 generations of women, my mother, Eleanor, and me. Each of us had faced abandonment in our own way. And now, it was my turn to transform that pain into purpose, that loss into a legacy. That night, alone in the office that was now mine, I made a promise. To Eleanor, to my mother, to all the women still out there, waiting to be found. I would continue. 5 years have passed since Eleanor's death. The mansion remains as it was, imposing and welcoming at the same time, but its purpose has expanded in ways perhaps even she could not have foreseen. The Aurora Foundation has become a nationally recognized organization, with branches in 3 states. We no longer work in the shadows. Although certain operations still require discretion, most of our work now happens in the light of day, with the support of authorities, other organizations, and even politicians who share our mission. I transformed part of the mansion into a permanent shelter for elderly women who have nowhere else to go. The rooms that were once empty are now full of life, of stories, of women who found not only refuge, but a new family. Helen, now in her late 70s, is practically the grandmother to them all. Arthur is still with us, though his responsibility has changed. Instead of just a driver and bodyguard, he now coordinates our security team, training young people to help in the rescue and protection of our wards. Caroline became my closest partner in running the foundation. Her legal expertise remains invaluable, especially now that our work is more public. Together, we managed to pass state laws that increase protections for seniors and criminalize abandonment more severely. As for Mark, we maintained minimal contact over the years. We verified that he truly was working as a volunteer lawyer, helping people without resources. Eventually, I answered his letter a brief but honest reply, saying that while I couldn't forget what happened, I recognized his efforts to change. We established a cautious truce, with rare phone calls on special dates and occasional email updates. He never remarried after Chloe. He dedicates himself fully to social work and, from what I know, lives a modest but dignified life. In the few times we have met, there is always a palpable awkwardness between us. The scars of the past are too deep to disappear completely, but there is also a mutual, though distant respect, which is perhaps the most we can hope for. One spring morning, 5 years after Eleanor's passing, I received an unexpected visitor. A young woman, no more than 30, appeared at the mansion gates asking to speak with me. My name is Diana Vance. She introduced herself when I received her in the library. Eleanor Vance was my grandmother. The revelation shocked me. Eleanor never mentioned having grandchildren. She didn't know about me, Diana explained. My father was Edward, her son. He never told her about my existence, and I only learned about her after he died. Diana had the same piercing eyes as Eleanor, the same determined posture. She told me how she found diaries and documents among her father's belongings after his death, revealing the complex history between him and Eleanor, culminating in the abandonment that changed her life forever. I spent years trying to piece it together, she said. I discovered the Aurora Foundation through a news report. When I saw your picture and read about the work you do, I knew I had found my grandmother's legacy. I offered her the tea that Helen had brought, absorbing the revelation. Your father never spoke of Eleanor? Only at the end of his life, when he was very sick. He talked about a strong woman who had built an empire from nothing, and how he had made the biggest mistake of his life by abandoning her. Diana paused, looking out the window at the gardens. He died with remorse, but also with a strange peace, as if he knew his mother had found a greater purpose. She did, I confirmed. And she helped many other people find theirs, too. Diana smiled shyly. That's why I'm here. I want to know the work she did, that you continue to do. I want to be part of this, if you'll let me. I'm a social worker. I've been working with seniors for 5 years. I looked at the young woman in front of me. Eleanor's blood, the continuation of her lineage that she never knew existed. There was something poetic about it, a cosmic justice closing a loop. Eleanor had lost a son, but now her granddaughter was returning, as if the universe were trying to balance the scales. I think Eleanor would be very happy to know you exist, I said, feeling tears in my eyes, and even happier to know you want to continue her work. In the following months, Diana became an integral part of the Aurora Foundation. Her training as a social worker brought a new perspective to our programs. She had Eleanor's determination, but also a sensitivity that likely came from her own experiences, growing up with a father marked by remorse, seeking redemption. One quiet afternoon, I took Diana to Eleanor's private office, which I had kept intact as a kind of memorial. I showed her the photograph of her grandmother with my mother, and the aurora-shaped brooch. Our lives intertwined in ways we couldn't imagine, I explained. Your grandmother saved me that rainy night, but in a way, I saved her too. By giving her the chance to rethink her concept of justice, to make space for the possibility of redemption, Diana held the brooch with reverence. It's strange to think I never knew her, but I feel like I've always known who she was. She is still alive through the work we do, I replied. And now, through you, too. It was Diana who suggested the expansion that would transform the Aurora Foundation once again. What if we helped not only the victims, she proposed, but also worked with the aggressors? Awareness programs, family therapy, mediation. The idea took me by surprise. You want to help people like your father? Like Mark? I want to prevent other people from becoming them, she clarified. Prevention is just as important as rescue. Imagine if someone had intervened before your son abandoned you on that road. Diana's proposal was bold, but it made sense. It was the next logical step, not just picking up the pieces after the tragedy occurred, but working to prevent families from breaking in the first place. It was something that would never have occurred to Eleanor, with her more binary view of victims and aggressors, but it aligned perfectly with my own journey of understanding and forgiveness. We created the Restart Initiative, an arm of the Aurora Foundation focused on families in crisis, offering counseling, mediation, and support before abandonment could occur. We invited psychologists, social workers, and family law specialists. And in a move that surprised everyone, I invited Mark to participate as a consultant. Why? Diana asked when I told her my plan. After everything he did? Priestess, he replied. Mark has lived both sides of this story. He was the son who abandoned his mother, but he is also someone who went through the painful process of recognizing his mistake and trying to repair it. His experience is valuable. The first meeting between Mark and me at the Foundation's facilities was tense and emotionally charged. He looked older than his 50 years, with completely gray hair and deep lines of worry on his face. When I introduced him to Diana and explained who she was, I saw something in his eyes. A mixture of recognition and perhaps envy that she had had the courage to seek a connection he had destroyed. Why are you doing this? Mark asked me when we were alone. Why give me this chance? Because I believe people can change, I answered honestly. Not completely, maybe. Not to the point of erasing the past, but enough to create a different future. He nodded, visibly fighting back tears. I don't deserve your generosity. It's not about deserving, I said. It's about choice, my choice, and yours too, if you decide to accept. Mark accepted, and his work in the Restart Initiative proved surprisingly valuable. His ability to speak with families in crisis, especially with adult children overwhelmed by the care of elderly parents, came from a place of genuine understanding. He knew the desperation, the frustration, the dark thoughts that could lead someone to consider abandonment as a solution. "I'm not here to judge you," he would tell the support groups. "I'm here because I've been in the darkest possible place, and I can tell you with certainty there is a way back." As the program grew, I began to notice something fascinating. The presence of Diana and Mark in the same organization created a strange parallel to the original story of Eleanor and Edward. It was as if the universe were giving us a second chance, not to erase the past, but to rewrite it with a different ending. One night, after a particularly intense day at the foundation, I found myself alone in the garden, sitting in the same gazebo where Eleanor had shown me the images of Mark and Chloe so many years ago. The moonlight illuminated the rose bushes, and the scent of the flowers filled the air. "I hope you're proud," I murmured to the starry sky, imagining that maybe, somehow, Eleanor could hear. "We transformed your legacy into something even greater than you imagined." A soft breeze brushed my face, gently rustling the roses. For a moment, I had the distinct feeling of not being alone, as if a familiar, loving presence were by my side, nodding in silent approval. I remembered the night it all began, the relentless rain, the cruel abandonment, the mysterious figure emerging from the darkness in her wheelchair. "Pretend to be my daughter. Your son and your daughter-in-law are going to regret this bitterly." Eleanor was right, but not in the way she had initially imagined. The regret came, but so did the possibility of redemption for Mark, for Diana, for myself, and perhaps, in some way, even for Eleanor, through the work we continued. At 67 years old, I was no longer the frail, frightened woman who had been left on that road. I had found an inner strength I never knew I possessed, a capacity to transform pain into purpose, abandonment into connection. And, most importantly, I discovered that it is never too late to start over, even after the worst of betrayals, even on the darkest of nights. When I went back inside the mansion, the lights in the main hall illuminated the portraits on the wall, no longer just the women Eleanor had helped, but also those we had taken in since. Dozens of faces, dozens of stories, dozens of rebirths. Among them, there was a special portrait, Eleanor in her wheelchair, with her determined and slightly austere gaze. Below it was a new portrait, recently added, myself, sitting in a similar chair, but with a softer smile. Diana had insisted on adding my photo to the gallery. "You are part of this story too," she argued. Maybe the most important part. I touched the aurora-shaped brooch I always wore, the same one I found in Eleanor's box. It symbolized everything we had built together, the promise of a new dawn after the darkest of nights. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was late for visitors, but at the Aurora Foundation, emergencies didn't keep hours. Helen came to meet me in the hall, looking slightly flustered. "Mrs. Holden, forgive me for bothering you at this hour, but there is someone." Before she could finish, a young woman burst in, holding up an elderly woman who could barely stand. The young woman's face was marked by tears and exhaustion. The older adult seemed disoriented and frightened. "Please," the young woman said, her voice trembling, "we found you through the Foundation's website. My grandmother. My parents left her at a gas station. They said they were going to the bathroom and never came back. That was 3 days ago." I approached the elderly woman, taking her trembling hands in mine. Her eyes, clouded by cataracts and confusion, met mine. "It's all right now," I said softly, feeling the echo of Eleanor's words that rainy night. "You are safe here." The woman squeezed my hands with surprising strength, as if I were her last hope in the world. And in that moment, I understood with crystal clarity the true purpose of everything we had built. It wasn't just about justice or revenge or even redemption. It was about creating a place where the cycle of abandonment could finally be broken. "Helen, prepare the blue room," I instructed, still holding the woman's hands. "Arthur, call Dr. Peterson for a full exam. Diana needs to be notified in the morning." As the team mobilized with the efficiency that had become our trademark, I guided the elderly woman to the living room, where the fireplace always remained lit on cold nights. "What is your name?" I asked gently. "Louise," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Louise. Welcome to the Aurora House, Mrs. Louise," I said, helping her settle into a comfortable armchair near the fire. "Your story ends here, and a new one begins. As I watched her accept a cup of hot tea from Helen's hands, I thought about how life moves in circles. Eleanor had found me when I was at my most vulnerable, just as I was now finding Louise. Mark had abandoned me, just as Louise's children had abandoned her. But the crucial difference was that now, there was a place to interrupt that cycle, to transform abandonment into a new beginning. The Aurora house would continue long after I was gone, just as it had continued after Eleanor. Diana would take my place one day, perhaps with Mark's help, finally tying together the loose ends of a story that began with pain, but didn't have to end that way. I looked out the window at the starry night and silently thanked that mysterious woman in her wheelchair who had appeared from nowhere on a desolate road and changed the course of so many lives, starting with mine. "You were right, Eleanor," I murmured. They did regret it bitterly. But what you didn't foresee is that regret can be the beginning of healing. Time, as I learned, is a patient teacher. 10 years have passed since Eleanor found me on that dark road, and 8 since she departed. At 72 years old, I see the world with a clarity that only age and experience can bring. My body may be more frail, but my mind and spirit are stronger than ever. The Aurora Foundation has flourished beyond the most optimistic expectations. We now have 12 shelter homes across the country, each following the model that began in that mansion. Diana took over as executive director 3 years ago, allowing me to gradually step back from daily operations. Her marriage to a dedicated doctor brought the first child to the mansion in decades, little Beatrice, a girl with bright eyes and an indomitable spirit, like her great-grandmother. Mark, in his 60s, became a pillar of the Restart Initiative. His transformation was complete, from an ungrateful son to a tireless advocate for the rights of the elderly. We never returned to the close relationship of before, but we found a new form of connection through shared work. One autumn afternoon, as I watched the golden leaves fall in the garden, Caroline came to find me with a grave expression. "Margaret," she began, "I have news about Chloe." The name still evoked a pang of discomfort, even after so many years. After her divorce from Mark, Chloe had disappeared from our lives. As far as we knew, she had moved to another state and started over completely. "What happened?" I asked, noting the seriousness on Caroline's face. "She's in the city hospital. Terminal cancer. No family, no friends, no resources." The irony of the situation was not lost on me. "How much time does she have?" "Weeks, maybe less," Caroline replied. "She specifically asked to speak with you." It was a surprise to the hospital's social worker, who contacted us when Chloe mentioned your name. I remained silent for a long moment, contemplating the strange twist of fate. The woman who had conspired to abandon me was now, herself, abandoned in her final moments. "Are you going to see her?" Caroline asked. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "Schedule it for tomorrow, please." When I told Diana about the planned visit, she was visibly disturbed. "After everything she did? Why bother?" "Because some lessons can only be learned when we look our past in the eyes," I replied. "And because no one deserves to die alone, not even Chloe." The next day, Arthur drove me to the hospital. Chloe's room was small and impersonal, with only the basic medical equipment and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. When I entered, I barely recognized her. The beautiful, arrogant woman I knew had been reduced to a frail, sallow figure in the bed. Her eyes, however, still held a spark of recognition when she saw me. She tried to sit up, but weakness prevented her. "Margaret," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You came." "I came," I replied, sitting in the only chair beside the bed. "Caroline told me you wanted to talk to me." Chloe nodded, closing her eyes briefly as if gathering strength. "I need to tell you something. Before I go." I waited as she coughed, her thin body shaking with the effort. Finally, she continued. "It was my idea," she confessed, looking at me directly for the first time. "To abandon you on that road." Mark hesitated, but I insisted. I said it was the only way to ensure we would have everything. The confession didn't surprise me, but I still felt a pang of pain hearing the confirmation. "Why?" I asked, not with anger, but with genuine curiosity. "Greed," she answered simply, "and fear. Fear of ending up like my own mother, who died in poverty, depending on strangers." I thought if we had your house, your money, we would be safe. She let out a bitter laugh that turned into another coughing fit. Ironic, isn't it? I ended up exactly as I feared, alone, with nothing, depending on the charity of others. I looked around the sterile room and felt a mixture of emotions. Pity, but also a strange sense of closure. I didn't come here to judge you, Chloe, I said finally. I came because you asked. She extended a trembling hand in my direction. I hesitated for a moment before taking it in mine. Her skin was cold and dry as paper. I wanted to ask. For forgiveness, she said, tears running down her hollow cheeks. Not because I deserve it, but because I need to say it before I go. What we did, what I did, was unforgivable. Silence filled the room as I considered her words. Years ago, it would have been impossible for me to offer this woman forgiveness. But time and experience had taught me lessons the younger Margaret could never comprehend. I forgive you, Chloe, I said finally, surprising both of us with the sincerity in my voice. Not because what you did was acceptable, but because forgiveness frees me as much as it frees you. Tears of relief streamed down her face. Thank you, she whispered. There is one more thing I need to ask. What? I don't want to die here, she said, looking at the impersonal walls. Alone, in a cold place like this? I understood immediately what she was asking. It was a bold request, considering our past, but also a deeply human one. I will speak with the doctors, I said, standing up. If your condition allows for a transfer, you can spend your last days at the Aurora house. The surprise and relief on her face were palpable. Why? She asked, echoing my own question from moments before. Why would you do this for me? Because the Aurora house exists precisely for people who have been abandoned, I replied. Regardless of what you did in the past, I believe everyone deserves dignity at the end. 3 days later, Chloe was transferred to the Aurora house. Diana protested initially, but eventually accepted my decision. Mark, surprisingly, supported me from the beginning. She's dying, Mother, he said simply. Revenge doesn't make sense at this point. We settled Chloe into an airy room with a view of the garden. In the days that followed, I saw the surprise in her eyes every time she received gentle care, a kind word. It was as if she were experiencing unconditional generosity for the first time, precisely from the people who had the most reason to hate her. A week after her arrival, she called me to her room. She was visibly weaker, her breathing labored, her eyes sunk in dark sockets. I need to ask, she said with difficulty. That woman, in the wheelchair, the one who found you that night, who was she? The question took me by surprise. Why do you want to know? Because, in the last few days, I've been dreaming about her, Chloe replied. In my dreams, she watches me, not with anger, but with understanding, as if she knows something I still don't. I sat beside her bed, adjusting the pillow so she could breathe easier. Her name was Eleanor Vance. She was a former judge who dedicated her life to helping women who had been abandoned, like me, like she herself was, once. Chloe's eyes widened slightly. She was also? Yes, I confirmed. By her own son, in circumstances similar to mine. And what happened to her son? I hesitated, considering whether to tell the whole story. He suffered the consequences of his actions. He lost everything and eventually died alone, never having reconciled with his mother. Chloe closed her eyes, absorbing the information, but with Mark and me. It was different, she murmured. You gave us a chance for redemption. Yes, I agreed. That was my choice. And Mark's. A faint smile touched her pale lips. Thank you for that last choice, Margaret, for showing me there is another way, besides retribution. 2 days later, Chloe passed away peacefully in her sleep. Mark was by her side, not as an ex-husband, but as a fellow human on her final journey. We arranged a simple but dignified funeral. To my surprise, several residents of the Aurora house attended, women who had only known Chloe in her final days, but who understood, perhaps better than anyone, the value of a compassionate end. After the funeral, Diana found me in the garden, sitting in my favorite spot near the rose bushes. She sat beside me in silence for a while before speaking. I never fully understood why grandmother chose the name Aurora for all of this, she said finally. But I think I understand now. Oh? I asked, curious. The aurora. The dawn. It comes after the darkest night, she explained. It's not just the end of the darkness, but the announcement of a new beginning. What you did for Chloe showed me that new beginning is possible, even in the final moments of a life. I smiled, moved by her understanding. Eleanor would have been proud of you. Of both of us, Diana corrected. You completed what she started, Margaret. You transformed a project of justice into a mission of healing. That night, alone in my room, I reflected on the strange path life had laid out for me. 10 years earlier, I was a broken woman, abandoned on the side of a dark road, without hope or a future. Now, I was the matriarch of a true family, not of blood, but of shared purpose. I took the aurora-shaped brooch, which I never left my side, and held it against the light. The golden rays seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as if they contained the essence of all the stories that intertwined in that mansion over the years. Eleanor, Edward, Mark, Chloe, Diana, myself, and so many other women who had found their way to us. Abandonment, I realized, didn't have to be the end of the story. It could be, paradoxically, the beginning of something new, an opportunity to discover an inner strength we never knew we possessed. For Eleanor, that discovery led her to create an empire of justice. For me, it led to a mission of compassion and healing. And for future generations, for Diana, for little Beatrice, for all the women who would still cross the gates of the Aurora house, perhaps it meant the chance to break the cycle completely, to create a world where no woman need fear being discarded when she was no longer considered useful or convenient. As sleep enveloped me, I had a clear vision of Eleanor, not in her wheelchair, but standing tall, strong, and proud as she must have been before the accident. Beside her was my mother, Elise, both smiling in approval. And between them, a figure I recognized as Edward, Eleanor's lost son, finally reconciled with his mother in the peace that transcends this life. You did well, they seemed to say. You completed the circle. I woke with the first ray of sun coming through the window. A new day. A new beginning. The dawn had come again, as it always did, chasing away the shadows of the night. And I was ready to greet it, grateful for the winding road that brought me here, even with all its pains and challenges. Because in the end, I understood the deepest lesson Eleanor had taught me that rainy night. Sometimes, it is precisely in the moment we are abandoned that we discover who we truly are and what we are capable of. And that discovery can change not only our own life, but the lives of generations to come. Now, if you like this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left you speechless. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos that I don't post here. I'll be waiting for you there.